Henry Ford was born on July 30th, 1863. He was raised on a farm in Greenfield Township, Michigan. In 1879, he left his family's farm and moved to Detroit on December 1st, 1879, to work in a machine shop. He worked there for almost 10 years, becoming an expert machinist. In 1888, he married Claire Bryant. He knew Claire as a child. On April 11, 1888, he moved to an 80-acre farm known as Dearborn, Michigan. In September of 1891, he and Claire moved back to Detroit after Henry accepted a job as an engineer with Edison Illuminating Company. After a couple of years of marriage, Etzel Bryant Ford was born on November 6, 1893, and the family lived in Detroit for a few more years. In 1893, Henry introduced his first hand-built gasoline engine, which he constructed in his home kitchen sink on December 24, 1893. That was quite an exciting Christmas for the Ford family. Over the next 6 months, he worked on the quadricycle and drove it through the streets for the first time on June 4, 1896. He continued to work at Ford Edison Illuminating Company until he started his own company and becoming superintendent of Detroit Automobile Company in 1899.
Henry Ford had a few jobs that led to his love of automotive engineering. First, he worked at Michigan Car, then at James Flower and Brothers Machine Shop, and also at Detroit Dry Dock Company. Ford also worked at McGill Jewelry Store. It was there that Ford's tinkering with electronics started due to him fixing watches. Henry Ford's interest in internal combustion engines led him to construct a small, one-cylinder gasoline model which sputtered its way to life on his kitchen table. The quadricycle was not the first working automobile in history, but it was Henry Ford's first, and the first of many Ford vehicles. Henry Ford built his quadricycle in a brick shed behind his house. When the car was ready to run, Henry discovered it was too wide to go through the door of his shed. He was so excited to get his car out for a test run that he took an axe and smashed the bricks out of the wall. At 4 a.m. on June 4, 1896, Henry sat atop his first automobile and took it for a spin. It ran successfully for a few blocks, but stalled from ignition trouble soon after his trip began. Ford's quadricycle looked nice and ran well, but it was too small and incomplete for large-scale production. And so he began work on a second automobile, thinking ahead to the production end of the process. A year later, he completed it, and it was a marvel of a design. Everything was geared towards simplicity and compactness. It was easy to drive and maintain. All that he needed was financial backing and sufficient capital to mass produce it. Ford quickly found the perfect backer, William H. Murphy, one of the most prominent businessmen in Detroit. The new company was dubbed Detroit Automobile Company, and all who were involved had high hopes, but problems soon arose. The car Ford had designed was a prototype needed to be reworked. He kept trying to refine the design to come closer to his ideal, but it was taking far too long, and Murphy and the stockholders were getting restless. In 1901, a year and a half after it had started operation, the board of directors dissolved the company. They had lost faith in Henry Ford. But Henry Ford never lost faith in himself. He once said, "Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently." So in analyzing this failure, Ford came to the conclusion that he had been trying to make his automobile serve too many customer needs. He would try a second time, starting out with a lightweight and smaller vehicle. He convinced Murphy to give him another chance, something rare in this fledgling automobile business. Still, believing in Ford's genius, he agreed, and together they formed the Henry Ford Company. However, less than a year after its establishment, Ford left the company. This time, the break with Murphy was final.
In 1907, Henry Ford announced his goal for the Ford Motor Company, to create a motor car for the great multitude which everyone could afford. Ford's engineers took the first steps toward this goal by designing the Model T, a simple, sturdy car offering no factory options, not even a choice of color. The Model T kept the same design for 15 million vehicles until the last one rolled off the line in 1927. It was less expensive than most other cars, but it was still not attainable for the multitude. Ford realized he needed a more efficient way to produce the car in order to lower the price. He and his team looked at other industries and found 4 principles that would further their goal: interchangeable parts, continuous flow, division of labor, and reducing wasted effort. Using interchangeable parts meant making the individual pieces of the car the same every single time. That way any valve would fit any engine and any steering wheel would fit any chassis. This meant improving the machinery and cutting tools used to make the parts. Once the machines were adjusted, a low-skilled laborer could operate them, replacing the skilled craftsperson who formerly made the parts by hand. Then, to improve the flow of the work, it needed to be arranged so that as one task was finished, another began, with minimum time spent in setup. Ford was inspired by the meat packing houses of Chicago and a grain mill conveyor belt he had seen. He divided the labor by breaking the assembly of the Model T into 84 distinct steps. Each worker was trained to do just one of these steps. Ford put these principles into play gradually over 5 years, fine-tuning and testing as he went along. In 1913, they came together and the first moving assembly line ever used for large-scale manufacturing was formed. Before, it took 12 hours to produce one car. Now, Ford produced cars at a record-breaking rate, a complete production every 93 minutes. With time, he was able to produce a Model T every 24 seconds. That meant he could lower the price and still make a good profit by selling more cars. Ford had another notion, rather original in its time. The workers were also potential customers.
In 1914, Ford started an industrial revolution by doubling factory workers' wages from $2.34 an hour to $5 a day. This was a move that helped build the U.S. middle class in the modern economy. All workers were placed on hourly job classifications. Ford believed that by raising the workers' pay, the workers would be happier and would be more productive. Ford's decision to offer $5 a day attracted thousands of immigrants and African Americans to Ford Motor Company. Before this change, there was high workman turnover due to the poor working conditions. In 1916, Ford represented 62 nationalities and more than 900 people with disabilities. In 1918, the company took steps to ensure that the work environment would accommodate a diverse population of workers. In 1919, many people of Middle Eastern descent came to Dearborn to work for Ford, which led to the creation of the first mosque built in the United States. By 1920, Ford had more African American workers than any other automobile company.
Ford's idea of profit sharing worked. Ford was called a traitor to his class by other industrialists and professionals, but he held firm in believing that well-paid workers would put up with dull work, be loyal, and buy his cars.
Due to all the production, Henry Ford needed more space because the company grew very rapidly. Therefore, he moved his company to Highland Park, Michigan on January 1, 1910, opening the largest building in Michigan at that time. During World War I, Ford's factories were converted to create ships and other miscellaneous goods for the war's efforts. In 1915, on December 5th, Ford's Oscar II peace ship set sail for a Norway expedition to end World War I. After the war, the company was rapidly growing. Ford then started a construction of a new industrial facility called Rouge River in Dearborn, Michigan. By this time, Ford's interest for industry had started to wane, and he was entered into a bid for Senate on November 5th, but he did not win.
Henry Ford laid the foundation of the 20th century. The assembly line became the century's characteristic production mode and eventually applied from everything to phonographs to hamburgers. The vast quantities of the war material turned out on those assembly lines were crucial to the Allied victory in World War II. High-wage, low-skilled factory jobs pioneered by Ford accelerated both immigration from overseas and the movement of Americans from the farms to the cities. The same jobs also accelerated the movement of the same people into an ever-expanding middle class. Ford's manufacturing principles were adopted by countless other industries. Henry Ford did not invent the automobile. He didn't even invent the assembly line, but more than any other single individual, he was responsible for transforming the automobile from an invention of unknown utility into an invention that profoundly shaped the 20th century and continues to affect our lives today. Henry Ford went beyond his 1907 goal of making cars affordable for all. He changed the habits of a nation by developing profit sharing and shaped its very character.